Hello, I'm Julie Swenson, Managing Director of Forward Theater Company in Madison, Wisconsin.
And I'm Mike Fisher, Milwaukee-based theater writer and dramaturg.
And I'm Jen Uphoff-Gray, founder and artistic director of Forward Theater Company. And this is Theater Forward, a monthly conversation about theater from a local, regional, and national perspective. From Madison to Manhattan, we're excited to share insights into our own company while exploring issues surrounding theater in the Midwest and around the country. Welcome to episode 115 of Theater Forward.
Great to be here.
So in this episode, we are going to go back to our Theater Forward mailbag to answer a few questions from our listeners. I personally love these episodes. I hope after you listen, you will send us your questions for the next one. So I have to confess, we are recording this in the middle of November, and we got a question from friend Kelsey Bobby that I have to confess appealed to my slightly cranky mood at this particular time in history. And her question is, what classic are you not as enraptured with? Bring the heat to some dead, probably white male writers. So while I tend to think of myself as an optimistic and glass half full kind of person, I am delighted to get to work out a little bit of my cranky mood on some things that I personally don't need to see anymore. So I'll just, the first thing that came to my mind, I have to say, is our dear friend Arthur Miller, who I know is a beloved titan of the American theater. And I will confess, when I was in high school, I thought there was nothing more brilliant than The Crucible. Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, oh my gosh, this is the heroic savior using theater to fight injustice in the world. Great. You know, when you reread those plays now, the misogyny, the self-importance. And I have to say, I am looking on this screen at two of my beloved white male collaborators who could not be more amazing humans and allies, but oofda. The ways I am losing patience with misogyny in America right now. And I think plays like Arthur Miller's really elevate and support that. And honestly, we just don't need it anymore. We don't need it anymore. There are better plays, also better plays by white men that are out there and being written right now. And while I understand the value of classics and of studying the classics and occasionally seeing the classics, I could do with seeing these ones a whole lot less. That's enough for me.
Can I jump in on something that's not, it's not literary in any way, but I remember in high school talking about Death of a Salesman, and I still really, really do like Death of a Salesman.
Sure.
I feel that's that's his best play, and it's part of the canon. But my mother, speaking of misogyny, hated Arthur Miller because he treated Marilyn Monroe poorly. That was always her response to any of his plays. So she would be very happy with you right now, Jen Gray.
Well, yeah, and I'm very happy with you too, Jen Gray, because I'm on record in print a bunch of times talking about how we need less of his heteronormativity on stage right now. And I also think for liberal audiences of the sort that tend to come to theater, Arthur Miller just sort of scratches their back and makes them feel self-righteous. It doesn't challenge them to think or push the envelope in any way on the issues being raised. I mean, gosh, it's bad that witches were hanged. Oh, that's a real tough one to get your head wrapped around, Cool. So there's that. There's all the ways in which that play in particular is so sexist and does so little while glorifying John Proctor to talk about, what John Proctor was actually doing that got him into trouble in the first place with underage woman with whom he's committing statutory rape. I could certainly put that one to the side. And since you're talking about other white men, in addition to Mr. Hayden looking at me right now and myself, I'll plug here for why aren't we seeing more of Tennessee Williams, and particularly late Tennessee Williams? Here's somebody who partly because of his position within American society at the time, did get at what it means to be an outsider, did understand women, is, I've always said, the greatest American playwright. And I don't understand why we're not seeing more of those plays outside of seeing yet another production of Streetcar or Glass Menagerie. Great plays, but guess what? The guy who was writing for a long time after that, in the second half of his career, has some real winners. Okay, you can see I'm feeling the same thing you're feeling in
But
terms of
also,
self.
but Mike, oh my God, the role reversal. I just got on and like just, totally went after someone. I mean, you're like, but let me uplift this positive example. I feel like I love this so much.
Oh, but let me
Great.
come back down in the mud with you by talking about David Mamet. Talk about
Yes.
toxic masculinity. If I never see another production of Glengarry Glen Ross or American Buffalo, I will be a very, very happy white male camper. I am so sick of those two plays. I'm so sick of him, period. Blathering. He just did it recently again in a Chicago Tribune editorial, basically bashing Chicago for not being the city it was when he was young. Read between the lines, non-woke and white and middle class in the sort of way that he was when he was coming up. Like, who needs it? There are great lines in those two plays. There are other plays that are handling those themes, and these not written by white men, mostly written by women, that handle the same themes in such more interesting and unsettling ways. I feel like when you watch David Mamet, you're just watching a sort of voyeuristic freak show where you can sort of be titillated as a man by men acting poorly. And that somehow with him, and I feel the same way about Neil LaBute, who I used to feel much better about than I do now. I don't need them. Let's move on.
But why do we keep doing it? We've got another Glengarry Glen Ross coming to Broadway.
I know.
That's probably a topic for a whole podcast. Why that play? Why multiple times? Is it, are we at an era in American theater when instead of striving to someday play Hamlet, men are saying, someday I hope to do Glengarry Glen Ross. That's my bucket list role. Why? I don't understand why it keeps coming up. That to me is very surprising.
It seems to be catnip for movie actors for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like every however many years we get a revival and they're able to get some TV or movie actors who are like, what I want to do is stand on a stage and yell a lot of profanity, which again, I understand that desire. But
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, I co-sign 100% Mike Fisher on that one. And I say that having worked on a play sort of with David Mamet early in my career, even though he never showed up. It was all communicating via, email and God, this is the 90s, probably letters. But I was fax, honest to God. He sent a lot of notes in via fax. He did,
Mm-hmm.
Julie. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I was assistant director shortly out of college on the off-Broadway premiere of Death Defying Acts, which was directed by Michael Blakemore. Go back to my, our earlier in this year episode if you want to talk about the beautiful Michael Blakemore. But it was 3 one-act plays by David Mamet, Elaine May, and if you want to talk about badly behaved white men, Woody Allen. And yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine with no more of that. Please and thank you. Julie, do you have anyone you want to throw under the bus while we're at it?
I don't. I actually, my takeaway from this part of our discussion is looking for the Tennessee Williams play that I would like to see come back. Yeah,
Aw.
totally agree with that.
Great.
Which brings us to our next question, and it's a 2-parter by the wonderful Greg Pragle, who most recently was in our production of King James. And his 2-parter is what kind of space is your favorite to watch, direct, or perform? And if you had a second space, what would it look like?
Love
So
that.
I'll take that really quickly and say how much I really do like our thrust stage in the Playhouse. That 3-sided audience that is a challenge. It's an absolute challenge for actors, for directors, for designers. But I think you can put 330 people in that theater and it still feels like a smaller space. And I love that. And it still feels intimate. And I enjoy going to, I'm less enamored by a proscenium stage now. And being so far away. I usually, whenever I go to a proscenium stage to play, I have tickets way in the balcony or way in the back of the orchestra, and it feels like miles, miles away. And Thrust does not. And I would say, if we had a second space, I am of two minds on this. One of our second spaces would be the earlier in a run, or adjacent to a run, where we can indeed do um, the reimagining of classics. Now, we've already determined it would not be classics by Arthur Miller or David Mamet, but I think there are ways to bring some of these classics, make them fresh and lively, and that would be really interesting. And it's not what we do on the main stage at all. And then, of course, there's the late night cabaret stage, the 10 p.m. for people who want to see shows at 10 p.m. There's tables, there's alcohol, and that's the great edgy stuff that might not equate into a main stage production for us, but some really valuable shows that I'm positive there is an audience for.
I love that. I'll kind of concur, Julie, that I've been directing for decades now. I'm feeling a little elderly, and in all kinds of spaces. And I don't know. There's a reason that I've found this artistic home where we do our work on a thrust stage. Thrust has always been my favorite, both for that intimacy factor, but also as a director. I totally understand that for an audience member, you get intimacy out of a thrust, but also it can sometimes be frustrating because you feel like you aren't always seeing everybody's face all the time. Because, we play the angles in a thrust. And, my goal as a director is always to make sure that no one in any seat feels, sort of discriminated against relative to other people. Everyone's going to sometimes get faces and sometimes get backs of heads. And that, my goal is to always keep it moving, give you something to look at. But that can be the downside. On the other hand, the flip side of that is that actors on a stage that is a thrust can talk to each other in a way that they can't on a proscenium. When you're on a proscenium, you have to do what we call cheating out, where you sort of angle your body and angle your face. So you're not always really engaging, dead on with the person you're interacting with, because you're sort of opening it out so that the people in the audience can see it. In a thrust space, people can behave much more naturally, I think, and in how they move, how they relate to each other physically. And it contributes not just because audience is closer, but they're actually seeing people behave in a more naturalistic human fashion. And I think both of those things heighten the emotional impact of a play in a thrust space. So by far my favorite. The few times I've gone back to do something on a proscenium since all these years I've spent at Forward, it's felt really frustrating artistically for me. And my second space idea is not dissimilar to yours, Julie. I really think that for me it's the sort of black box, smaller space, fewer seats to sell, smaller costs involved with production design, so that we can do, there are some people who think that what Forward programs is really risky. And I think compared to other theaters of our size, we are, but there are a lot of edgier plays that we don't do because they're not right for our audience or for a 300 seat theater. And to be able to do some of the more provocative, newer, less finished, more developing plays in a smaller black box where the economic stakes aren't as high, and you can draw, it's okay to draw from the smaller audience that is interested in seeking that kind of work, would be really exciting. I don't want anyone listening to this to think that is in our near future. Plenty of other things we need to work on first, but that is a nice longer term dream for us.
Yeah.
Boy,
how about you, Mike? You see things in every kind of space all the time.
Well, I too am a huge fan of the thrust space, and for me, the spaces at Stratford, three of which are thrust theaters, and this was really the rebirth of the idea of the thrust stage in North America. Happened
Mm.
at Stratford with its festival theater under Tyrone Guthrie and in the 50s. And that theater, even though it holds almost 2,000 people, because it's thrust and because of the way it's designed, feels intimate. And then their new theater, the Tom Patterson Theater, which is a severe thrust. For those of you that have been to the courtyard space at Chicago Shakespeare, it's that idea of a thrust. I love, love, love that space. And again, it allows all the things that Jen and Julie you've already talked about. I of course love. I mean, honestly, our space is my favorite space, but I'm so hopelessly biased that deliberately steered away from that. But I do love both the intimacy and the thrust that the Playhouse allows. In terms of a second space, again, I just co-sign what's been said. I mean, for me, and I'm on record on this podcast as having said this before, it's not even up and coming playwrights. It's somebody like Carol Churchill, who never gets her due in North America and in this country in particular. And you could do some of these great plays of hers, which we absolutely cannot financially. It would be irresponsible to be doing some of her plays in our main space. They just aren't going to sell in that kind of way, but there is an audience for that kind of theater that's hungry for that kind of theater. And if we had the second space, which, yes, Jen, I hear you, not immediately, but it will happen. It will happen, listeners. We are going to have this second space someday. I'm sure of it. And when we do, those are the kinds of plays we will be able to do to add to the amazing plays we already do. Totally excited by that.
Love it. So, Mike, I think that might segue nicely to our last question.
Well, this last question comes from Sherry Coons, who's on the National Council of the Dramatists Guild, as somebody who has written the lyrics or book for more than a dozen musicals. She's also, I don't know how Sherry sleeps. Sherry is not only, by dint of her work with the Dramatists Guild, a Tony voter, but who lives in Chicago. But she's also a member of the Jeff Committee in Chicago. So she's seen hundreds of plays a year in two completely different cities, and somehow managing to still teach classes on Sondheim and the history of the American musical and be the amazing person that she is. And she has a question where she's talking about play selection. She says, what is the process for play selection at Forward? Where do the scripts come from and who reads them? How are they discussed? With a wealth of terrific plays to choose from, what are the qualities that separate the final choice for your season from those you appreciate but put aside? Even the wording of that question, in terms of how gentle she's being toward the plays that we ultimately don't choose, just is vintage Sherry, and why I love her. I guess I'll start with that. And we're all thinking about this because we've just finished choosing, drum roll, you'll have to wait till March 25 to hear the specifics, but we've just finished choosing a season. And in the meeting of our advisory company, and I'll let Jen or Julie talk about the specifics of the advisory company's role in working with the artistic director to choose a season. One of our advisory company members, Josh Krause, talked about how a play that he might not have normally thought of that will be in our season next year as a forward play is, for that very reason, exactly a forward play. Because what you get at Forward and the way in which we think about putting a season together is to surprise people, is to ensure that no audience member, no subscriber, no matter how well they know us, is going to come into all four plays for our season, having every one of those plays in their wheelhouse. There is something in that season that is going to surprise them or push them or challenge them or make them think about appreciating a new way of seeing theater or a new genre or a subgenre within theater. And I am so proud of our work because it really does, as well as any theater I can think of, embody that idea of choosing plays that are representative of the breadth of our audience and of the breadth of our community, all of whom come at theater with different ideas and tastes and loves, all of which we should be trying to speak to and be in dialogue with. And we do that consistently.
Beautifully said, Mike. I can address the sort of the pragmatic part of this question, like the actual process part. So we start considering plays with our literary committee, which is comprised of some members of our staff, our advisory company, and even a few of our board members. And Mike is currently the chair of that literary committee, which we are so grateful for. And the literary committee meets every month and has members who read, several plays a month, usually between 2 and 4 plays a piece. And the literary committee gets together and talks about those plays and makes recommendations of things that they think I should read, or things that they think are a good enough candidate for forward that our entire advisory company should read. Plays come to the literary committee from all over. Members of the committee follow different theaters, and particularly theaters that are doing programming not dissimilar to ours at Forward, newer works. They'll look and see what those companies might be debuting to see if something looks interesting. We have members of our audience who will sometimes email me and say, oh, I read about this play, or I saw this play in another city and it felt like a Forward play. You should look at it. We will track the things that are coming out of new play festivals or new play awards. Every year, I wait for that big September arts and leisure issue of the New York Times where they talk about everything coming on and off Broadway in the whole season, and I'll circle a bunch of new plays coming that sound intriguing. And we just get our hands on scripts from all over. And the first sort of winnowing spot is the literary committee. And they, Mike could probably speak more to this, but the literary committee reads a lot of plays, and the vast majority aren't right for us for whatever reason. And there are lots of different reasons for that. But something that seems like a plausible candidate for production in Forward's season then goes to our advisory company. And, we've talked about Forward's governance structure in the past. I won't go too deeply into it right now, but we essentially have two boards of directors. We have our board that is responsible for the financial, legal, governance, oversight of Forward. And we have our advisory company, which is responsible for the artistic choices and integrity of our company. So the advisory company meets monthly and is assigned a script every month where everybody reads the same script, and we come into come around a dining table and eat a meal and talk about whether that play makes sense for Forward, and looking at, do we have the resources and the people to do this play? Do we think it will speak to the audience? Do we think that it builds on conversations that we want to have? And the purpose is to have a lot of different aesthetic predilections at that table. The advisory committee doesn't vote on an individual play, but I'm there and I'm listening to everything everyone has to say. And then I'm trying to structure a season where we get a lot of balance, as you so beautifully articulated, Mike, a season where, honestly, I wouldn't expect anybody to deeply love every single play that we do, because I want them to be different, and art is subjective and people have different tastes. But I want everybody to find at least, I think of our typical subscriber and our 4-show season. And what I hope is that there will be one that hits them right in the center of their heart, and they feel like, oh my God, this is one of my favorite things I've ever seen. And I figure one of the 4, they might be like, wow, that was not to my taste, but I appreciate how well it was produced. Mm-hmm. And then there's 2 where they're like, wow, I really enjoyed that and felt like I got something really good out of it. And if that is the track record every season, I would be thrilled if every subscriber came away with that reaction to our 4-show seasons. Because we try to do a lot of different kinds of things. If we were a company in a big city like Chicago or New York, where there are scores and scores of professional theaters, we might have a much more narrow aesthetic lane that we were occupying, and trust that the audience that wanted what we were offering would find us. But in a smaller city like Madison, where there's not a lot of professional theater, we really want to be a little bit of something for everybody, even if not everything we do is for everybody, if that makes sense. Just to briefly address the last part of Sherry's question, like the qualities that separate the final choices from the ones that we set aside, that usually comes down to the season balance. Because oftentimes the things we set aside, it's not because we don't think it's a good play. It's because we are looking to create that 4-show season that has a lot of different things to offer. And so, we're not going to do 4 really heavy dramas in a season. We're not going to do 4 lighter weight comedies in a season. We're not going to do 4 plays that all deal with the same kinds of characters on stage or the same subject matter. And so, honestly, the difference between plays that we like that we do and plays that we like that we don't is about how does that jigsaw puzzle or patchwork quilt get get put together in a way that makes sense.
And I would add too, Jen, that it's not just how one show plays. I'm using air quotes
Yeah.
with the other three offerings, but if we have done something similar in past seasons,
Yeah.
if it's too close topically to something we have already done, and I do think oftentimes the literary committee ends a meeting saying, there were so many valuable things about this one play. Let's follow that playwright. And we've
Hmm.
had good luck with that. Maybe the next play this person writes will be the one for us. And oftentimes advisory company, and it breaks many of our hearts. We say, that's not going to work in this season. I sure hope someone else does it. I'll go and
Hmm.
see it. And
Hmm.
and when you have a group of 15 people, the breadth of the selections are going to be much bigger and deeper. But there are going to be some things that we have to let go, for the greater good. And I love that process.
What you have coming out of that, I think, both at the literary committee meetings and the advisory company meetings, and this is probably well, there's so many things I value about Forward, but this is near the top of the list for me, is you have passionate disagreement, vocalized
Mhm.
passionate disagreement about what sort of plays we should or shouldn't be doing, because to Jen's point, you have a breadth of aesthetic perspectives, and you've got different people who are strong-willed and opinionated and smart, who are bringing their best to the table. And yet, just about really always, it's handled with respect, and a real appreciation for where other people are coming from. I have seen people, I know I've done it myself, change our view of a play based on what happens in those discussions. And that, in the America that we're in right now, is a rare and precious commodity where you can have real dialogue and debate, and respect, despite the fact that not everybody's landing on the same page. And that's another way in which, ideally, and I think actually for us, Forward is embodying and reflecting the community that it's trying to serve. It's making room for dialogue and difference.
Fantastic.
Hallelujah. Y'all, we managed to go on quite a journey in this half an hour.
We did. Yes.
From let me take out some of my residual anger and grief about the world to celebrating the ways in which the work we do as theater artists invites dialogue, makes sense of disagreement, values respectful conversation. Yay. Yeah. I feel better already. And I hope that's the case for everybody listening, too. We took you on a journey today. But I think we can go ahead and say that is all for this episode of Theater Forward, a conversation about theater in Wisconsin, the Midwest, and America. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jen Uphoff-Gray.
And I'm Julie Swenson. And I want to thank again Kelsey, Greg, and Sherry for their really great questions.
I'm Mike Fisher, co-signed that. Our podcast is produced by our great co-signing co-pilot, Scott Hayden, without whom none of this would happen. You can follow us or share your thoughts on Facebook, and that's at Theater Forward, theater as always, spelled with an ER.
If you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to subscribe to us, and please leave a comment. Maybe we'll answer your question next.
We are so grateful to have you listening, and we will be back soon for another Theater Forward conversation.